Bob Fitrakis is an election integrity author and attorney. He is most known for the work that he did exposing the election fraud in Ohio in 2004. He was currently one of Jill Stein's lawyers during her recount effort in the 3 states. And he is the subject of our activist profile. Welcome, Bob.
Glad to be on the show.
Great. So I wanted to just take a little bit of time, as we did last week in our activist profile, and talk about not your childhood, your early childhood, but what was it growing up that some of your influences that caused you to be the activist that you are today? Give us a little bit of background about you.
Well, I actually was in the Christian missionary church. My family attended a very evangelical church, and for a while we were United Missionaries. There was only 5,000 of us in the world, and many of us were trained for martyrdom to go into places like Africa. But at a certain point, I was thinking, when I was about 12 and there was a riot in Detroit, why would we be going into Africa when we don't even pick up in the housing projects in our own neighborhood? So my dad was the bus pastor, and we ended up being kicked out of the church for insisting on picking up all people of all races. So had a tremendous influence on me.
Great. And tell us a little bit about your where you went to college and law school and what you were doing in those days.
Well, I actually originally went to Grand Valley State Colleges, which, unbeknownst to me, was the public Antioch of the time. It's since become very conservative with the influence of the DeVos families in Michigan. But when I went there, it was a radical school. I went there to play football, but I was sidetracked by far more interesting people who were activists. So I went to Grand Valley State Colleges back in the 70s. I studied at the University of Sarajevo. I studied worker self-management in the former Yugoslavia, in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Then I went to graduate school during the Reagan years at Wayne State University, where I picked up a master's as well as a PhD, and lived in a political commune on the Lower East Side of the city, trying to move people back into their houses who had been evicted, trying to support workers, and watching 2,200 fires in one night on Devil's Night as the city burnt down pretty much around us. Then I got a job teaching in Columbus, a tenure track position at Columbus State Community College, a former tech school, formerly Columbus Tech. We're the feeder school to Ohio State. I've been here 30 years. I'm a distinguished professor. But around 2000, I had become an investigative reporter, writing for the alternative weekly publication Columbus Alive, as well as editing a monthly, the Columbus Free Press. And I decided I was being hauled before grand juries, and they were going after a lot of my sources, and that I ought to go to law school. And so I did that on sabbatical, and in a couple of years picked up a law degree at The Ohio State University. And subsequently, the first major case I did was to sue my university for canceling the hemp festival. And despite being told we couldn't win that case, we did prevail. And then just a few years later, in 2004, I did a variety of cases involving the election. For example, I was involved in the Recount, sponsored by the Greens, but I also did Moss v. Bush. I did most of the research, and was one of the 4 lawyers that litigated the challenge to the Ohio electoral vote. And then after that, in 2006, for 5 years, we sued Ohio over that election and revealed many things, including an architectural map, computer architectural map, that showed that the vote count was privatized in Ohio and counted by a right-wing Republican partisan firm in the basement of the old Pioneer Bank building in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And
okay, we're moving through a lot of your, we're getting really far and getting close to the present. So we have plenty of time to talk about that. We want to talk about your background just a little bit more. Lily?
Well, I was one of the...
No, Lily had a specific question you wanted to ask him.
Sure.
Can we hear Lily? I'm not hearing her. Well, you know what? I'm going to ask you then. I thought it was very interesting when you sent me your bio yesterday and you mentioned that you had been in El Salvador in 1994. Can you talk a little bit about what drew you there and what you found? Because it seems to me that was formative for you.
Well, I was student body president back in the 70s when the Sandinistas were fighting to overthrow the government of Nicaragua. And our school actually, under our student council at the college, actually voted to give them all the student activities fees so they could win the revolution. That, of course, was vetoed by the Board of Control, who contained Richard DeVos. But in the 1980s, I spent a lot of time doing support work in CISPIS and a variety of other Central American support groups for El Salvador, for human rights. And then when there was finally a truce that was brokered, I noticed among the activists that some were going down to observe the election. And there actually was a posting in the American Political Science Association that I was a member of that said, we're looking for international observers. So I volunteered to go down and I ended up in the conflictive zone where the death squads met the rebels, met the last military, holdout units. So around the village of Sushitoto that had been destroyed, machine gunned from above with helicopters. So I was in sort of a heavily conflictive zone, and I volunteered to co-write the report from that area. And then they asked for volunteers, and I volunteered to edit it. So I got to edit the report of the international observers from all over the country and deliver that report to both the government and the United Nations.
Bob, you mentioned you had spent some time in Sarajevo as well. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. I was there back in 1978. I spent a long semester on scholarship dealing with worker self-management. And also, I was a so-called Cardellite. I was a market socialist. And it turns out I had stuff in my possession from Gilas and Cardelli that turned out to be illegal. But I found out a variety of things about how politics worked. For example, I was approached by one of our guides who had been working as an interpreter for Jimmy Carter, Michael Petrovich, and he asked me if I wanted to stay and get a scholarship. And I said, what kind of scholarship? He said, a Fulbright. And I said, what do you mean? I've never applied for a Fulbright. He says, well, we have some special scholarships. And what college would you like to go to? I can get you in wherever you need to get in. And at that point, it dawned on me I was being approached by the agency. And they told me all I had to do, I hang around with students. I know the language a little. Just meet with the head of U.S. Information Agency once a week for lunch and talk about what's going on in the country. So I declined that offer, realizing I hadn't really earned a Fulbright, but gave me tremendous insight as to how foreign policy functions.
Bob, when you were in Ohio in 2004, what did you uncover and what has been the result of that?
Well, we uncovered the first thing we were accused of being conspiracy theorists about was that we claimed they hid the machines. But they did hide the machines, and of course it was leaked, right? If you're going to the same polling place, and I was working as an attorney for the broad human rights coalition that had come together to look at the elections. But when you go to voting places and they have 2 machines and they're supposed to have 8, and they had 4 in the primary, you can pretty much figure it out. And they did actually hide. They had machines circulating the city. 42 machines, 42 precincts were missing machines, had less than half the machines missing. What I was able to conclude is they were all heavily minority districts. So you hid the machines in the minority districts, and people were waiting 3 to 7 hours to vote. Now, if you were white in the suburbs, where some of those machines ended up, you were waiting on average 15 minutes. So because I ran a newspaper, I could call up my reporters who lived throughout the city and the volunteers and say, keep track of how long it's taking you to vote. So that was one of the first revelations. And of course, many people were elderly, couldn't stand that long. And again, if you left the line, they told you had to start over. So really, I saw a woman who must have been 80 years old, an elderly Black woman who had a cane. I tried to get them, the election officials, to accommodate her. And of course, they said no, but she literally passed out. So I seen her after she recovered with medical aid, as she sort of wandered with her cane back to the car. I pledged at that time that I would look into this, that I didn't care what happened. I was going to figure out how an election system gets to be that bad and brutal and violate people's fundamental rights to vote.
What came after you did this work in Ohio? What were like the outcomes, we would say? Were there any reforms that came after that, or any? How would you say things went in the years thereafter?
Well, the first thing we did is, which turned out to be a stroke of luck to some extent, within 2 days of the election, I had been complaining in posting articles and talking on radio shows, even though Kerry had conceded. So there was a forum at a Universalist Unitarian Church, and I went there, and someone came up to me I've never seen before or since, but he did look like Eugene Victor Debs. And he comes up and says, if everything you're saying is true, why don't you hold public hearings and put people under oath? So I did. So I conducted the largest public hearings in the history of Ohio, where literally 500 people testified at 2 different sessions under oath. By putting people under oath, and many swore out affidavits, hundreds more, Congress moved in. John Conyers decided to have hearings in Washington and field hearings in Ohio. And there's a variety of stuff we found out. Number one, that essentially that election was conducted without the oversight of public IT people, but was run totally, essentially, by the Right to Life movement, a company called Triad, a company called GovTech, and a company called SmartTech. And one thing they had in common, they all knew each other from the Right to Life movement, and they'd all suddenly got involved in technology.
And has that, the mass hearings and Congress getting involved, has that changed things, at least in Ohio, or is that something that reform is still pending?
Well, it depends on who gets elected Secretary of State. And clearly with the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, in many ways, things have gotten worse with John Husted, the Republican Secretary of State. For example, one of our great revelations is they had illegally purged 305,000 voters, including a quarter of all the voters in the city of Cleveland, which was voting 81% for Kerry. So people showed up, and they had been deregistered, purged from the registration rolls, which is pretty much the only way that Bush could win. There was a variety of other of the hidden machines and what looked like old-fashioned electronic ballot stuffing in the southwest part of the state. And the machines were flipping, right? I think they've gotten better at this, but 31 machines in Youngstown, the election officials admitted they were flipping from Kerry to Bush. In Franklin County, people would vote for Kerry and the vote would fade away. And when it came down to do your final vote, we called it the Franklin County fade. So those were a variety of things that we uncovered, many that are still with us, but a reformed Secretary of State was elected, Jennifer Bruner, and she did a top to bottom review called the Everest Study and found that essentially people with personal electronic devices, PEDs, could pretty much hack the Ohio election. Companies in Cincinnati like Hardinter Civic, they have 12 areas of computer security. They're vulnerable in all 12. So essentially, and they have no isolation principles. So a simple device, thumb drive, flash drive in one precinct computer could in fact reprogram the entire vote of the entire system for the third largest county where the city of Cincinnati is in Ohio.
All right, Bob, this is really fascinating. I'd like to take us up to 2016 because I know we have a lot to talk about. You were one of Jill Stein's lawyers in the Recount. I'd like you to talk about, first of all, how that effort began. Was it your idea? Did you suggest it to Jill? Did she contact you? So how the effort began, then we're going to ask you some questions about how it proceeded, all the obstacles that were placed in, well, no, first I want to ask you what you were trying to find out before we talk about how we proceeded. Because a lot of people think that you were trying to find out things that you couldn't find out. So I want to be very clear about first, the purpose of the recount, how you got involved and what you were trying to find out.
Well, I was working at the Free Press. Harvey Wasserman and I had put out a book called The Strip and Flip Selection of 2016. And we had put that out early in the election year. And we had been following and writing about what we felt was a pattern of election flips that hurt Bernie Sanders and raised red flags that somebody was interceding in the election on behalf of Hillary Clinton. So we had put out a lot of articles on that. So after the election, we were working on updating the book after the primary. We did a analysis essentially saying, you know, we think Sanders really won the election. And then coming into the fall after the general election, we were working on the data to see if any of it made any sense. Now, my understanding, I got a call the Monday before Thanksgiving week from Jill Stein, and she was on the line with her campaign manager, David Cobb. And she said, we're being approached by John Boniface. Now, John Boniface is the attorney who handled the Green Party recount in 2004. He was a Green then. Later on, he shifted and ran as a Democrat in Massachusetts. So John was on the line and said, you know, I'm representing a variety of computer scientists, computer security experts, and scholars, and they think something went wrong with the election. You know, would you consider doing a recall? I mean, a recount, not a recall, but a recount to see, you know, if anything happened. So Jill and David were not very enthusiastic at all. So at that time, they asked me if I had any data. So I worked with a variety of statisticians, Pete Pekarsky, who's an attorney, Ron Bayman, who teaches stats in college. So we were looking at the numbers, And we didn't really hear back from Boniface or Jill Stein or David Cobb. But 1 week later, when I had gone on vacation, but we developed all of these numbers suggesting that 12 of the states for Trump and one state for Hillary Clinton seemed to have abnormally strange numbers outside the margin of error that compared to the unadjusted exit polls. So we were using the standard used by the US State Department and the Agency on International Development, stuff that's 3 or more standard deviation outside the margins of error. So we were looking at this stuff, and 1 week later, John Boniface came back on a Monday. I was put in a call with Jill and David, and they had seen the data we had developed, so they became interested in the recount. So, and then we began, and Boniface, from reading publicly, it looked like he had been trying to convince the Clinton campaign, which wouldn't have any part of it, to deal with these computer science experts. So we decided.
Now, can you tell me how you decided to do the 3 states that you did? Because as you know, the Green Party, many people in the Green Party, including Kevin Zeese and Margaret Flowers, published an open letter disagreeing with Jill Stein because their feeling was she only picked states. And if you have earbuds handy, it would be useful to use because we're getting feedback from your computer. She figured that, well, I should say Kevin Zeese said that the 3 states that you picked were states that Hillary lost. So they were very upset with Jill Stein for doing this. They said it was not democratic. She did not consult with the Green Party in terms of deciding to do.
I can't hear you.
All right.
I tried to put the earbuds in.
Okay, then never mind. That she did not consult with Jill Stein, the Green Party, and that the states that they picked were ones that Hillary lost. And the other thing was that the attorney that was used in Michigan was the Democratic Party attorney. Tell us why you decided to recount in these 3 particular states.
Well, my original impulse, but we didn't have the money for it, was to recount in 12 states where Trump had won, and 1 state where Hillary had won with an unexplained large vote total. So with that in mind, since we didn't have the money, the criteria was simple, is that what states were significantly outside the margin of error, 3 or more standard deviations, and were at the official vote count was at odds with the unadjusted exit polls. And 5 states fit that criteria: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Florida. So the problem is Jill had problems with standing in North Carolina. As you recall, she was a write-in. She didn't have actual ballot status. And of the 3, Florida had the least amount of deviation. In fact, there were other states that had far more suspect vote totals. Utah, where Hillary Clinton had lost a lot of votes according to the unadjusted exit polls, but it wouldn't have mattered. Even if we would have given her all those votes, she still wasn't going to win Utah. Missouri, the same thing. Just like with Hillary had an unexplained 6.2% of the vote over the unadjusted exit polls in New York, but you could have given her, Trump, all of those unexplained votes and doubled it, and he still would have lost New York. So the criteria was simple. Where did the unadjusted exit polls suggest somebody else won, and where it deviated significantly as to reach a margin of error, 3 or more times outside the standard margin of error with the deviations. So we really were looking at the deviation of the official vote count from the so-called unadjusted exit polls. So 5 states met that criteria. North Carolina eliminated again because Jill wasn't on the ballot, only as a write-in. Florida, because it was close. I mean, my state of Ohio, which I'd love to recount, the exit polls showed Trump winning by 0.1%, but the vote count being off 8.5%. That is an unexplained shift. So Hillary had 47% of the vote, Trump 47.1. The final vote ended up being like 50-42, an 8.5% shift. But we didn't investigate Ohio, which had some of the most implausible votes because the exit polls showed that Trump was winning by 1/10 of a vote. So it was all a formula based on red flags from the unadjusted exit polls to the actual official vote tally. And it was a standard that is used by our State Department outside the United States and by our Agency on International Development. So we thought we'd use America's standards against our elections.
Have you guys come up with a thesis or sort of a rationale as to why those exit polls were so far off, like in your state of Ohio or elsewhere? I know that Trump has even talked about that on his victory tour, where he's kind of mocked the exit polls. So it's come up, right? Like why were they so far off? I know polls were also off, like in the general election, where but those had deviations where you could have swung the other way and Trump would have won. So that it wasn't that crazy that he won based on the 2 or 3% margin of error. But in this case, like, what's your take on that?
Well, the take is there's a standard social science procedure that you go through when this happens. Sometimes in the old days, we used to call it his mister. To look, number one, you look at if there's some historical intervention. With pre-election polls, there can be historical events that occur, like Comey and the FBI finding new emails that would explain why in the pre-election polls some of the Clinton support eroded. In the exit polls, there really is virtually no history between voting and walking outside. So the next thing you go to in this his mister analysis is instrumentation. Are your machines, that is the computer voting machines, are they, the instrumentation, recording correctly? It's what you would check next. The problem you have there is that we allow private, partisan, for-profit companies using secret proprietary software to, in fact, program everything from the databases for voter registration to the e-poll books to the precinct level scanners to the DREs, the computer push and pray machines, to the central tabulation, to the election night reporting. All of it is non-transparent and non-verifiable. It's the hallmark of the American system. It's non-transparent, non-verifiable. Now, if I was in El Salvador there during the election, we talked about that earlier. If the Arena Party came in and told me, hi, we're having friends of ours who have given us money in our election, they'll be secretly programming the computer voting machine and no one can look at the source code and it won't be open source. And then we'll just allow our friends, political friends, to control the machine. My report would have been simple. I would have said presumption of fraud, elections invalid. But That's all of American elections. So we could look at the instrumentation. We can also look at the sample. Perhaps the polls are measuring wrong, right? We can go to the history, the instrumentation, the sample. Perhaps Edison Research Group became so incompetent, it's a possibility, that they simply forgot how to randomly and representatively sample a population. Doesn't seem likely, but the results are so strange, you got to look at it and measure. Yes.
Bob, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're running out of time here, and there were just a couple of things I wanted to cover. We've got about 2 minutes. Can you briefly summarize the obstacles that the Trump campaign, the Trump super PAC, the Republican attorney generals put in your way to prevent you from doing the recounts that you wanted to do? And then close by just telling us, give us a list of about, I don't know, 5 things that we need to have fair elections in this country so people can be sure that their votes count, and what our viewers can do to make that happen.
Well, in Wisconsin, there were 2 super PACs that sued, but also the state of Wisconsin ruled it was up to the Board of Canvassers, even though the judge said that the hand-counted paper ballots, looking at the actual paper, was the gold standard. 51% of that state supposedly recounted by simply running the ballots through the machine again and not allowing us to look at them. So that's a clear problem. Also, they didn't, we're still dealing with the Wisconsin Election Commission. They didn't put any of their source code in escrow. And as many people learned, in 5 machines, it looked like somebody had tampered with them. Also, some of the machines had SIM cards and it looked like access to a cell tower. That is still being dealt with before the Wisconsin Election Commission. So my belief is Wisconsin was an illegal recount as it now stands. And the Green Party spent $3.5 million to count less than half the vote. In Michigan, it was an absolute disaster. You had, of course, the Attorney General who wants to be governor, claiming that Jill was not aggrieved because she could not win, which, by the way, appears not to be in the statutes of Michigan. You also had the old 1954 law that was invoked that said precincts were uncountable if someone broke the safety seal. So if you don't want to recount, I recommend break the safety seals. And also, if there was one more vote than people that signed in, you couldn't count either, even though the election officials said there was almost always one more ballot than voters signed in, because that was the test ballot for the machines. So Michigan turned out to be a disaster as well. Their Secretary of State is now going to do, hopefully, a top to bottom review. Pennsylvania, I think the only one that, I think could have flipped would have probably been Michigan. We learned a lot, but Pennsylvania contain no VPAC, a voter verified paper audit trail. So in reality, it becomes impossible to recount Pennsylvania. Not only that, they said that we had to get, 3,000 precincts. We had to get 9,000 people, 3 from each precinct to recount, which would make it the strangest recount law perhaps in the world. So, and they also denied us the right to look at the audit logs at the machines. So there was no way really to recount Pennsylvania because of their reliance on computer voting machines that have no paper trails. So
okay, what do we need? What do we need? 1 minute. What do we need going forward with our elections, and what can viewers do to make that happen?
Hand-counted paper ballots, and as the transition to that open source, it already exists, the Trachtenberg system. We need to be able to look at the code if any tabulation is done using a computer, and the obvious best system is the one used in most democracies to actually look and count the ballots, the same one that was used in El Salvador. We need voting holidays, we need early voting, and above all else, we need to command the state a constitutional or statute that says every American has a right to vote, just like the European Union, so we don't get these mass purges and destruction of people's voting rights.
And what's a website for you where people can go to get more information and get involved?
Freepress.org, freepress.org, and thanks for the time. I appreciate it.
Great, and that's not to be confused with freepress.net,
No,
which
it's
is
not.
which is Craig Aaron's group. We had him on our show last week. So I want to thank you for being on our segment. We're going to be back with the robust opposition after this brief commercial, I guess you can call it, that celebrities put together to try to urge the electors to not vote for Donald Trump. And then we will be back. Lily Starling, Steve Horn, and I will be back to do a wrap up on that subject and to preview a future show.
And I don't believe the Russians hacked the system. I think it's an inside job. There's companies with keys to the kingdom.
Republican members of the Electoral College, this message is for you. As you know, our founding fathers built the Electoral College to safeguard the American people from the dangers of a demagogue and to ensure that the presidency only goes to someone who is to an eminent degree endowed with the requisite qualifications.
An eminent degree. Someone who is highly qualified for the job.
The Electoral College was created specifically to prevent an unfit candidate from becoming president.
There are 538 members of the Electoral College. You
and just 36 other conscientious Republican electors can make a difference
by voting your conscience on December 19th.
And thereby shaping the future of our nation.
I'm not asking you to vote for Hillary Clinton.
I'm not asking you to vote for Hillary Clinton.
I'm not asking you to vote for Hillary Clinton.
As you know, the Constitution gives electors the right to vote for any eligible person.
Any eligible person, no matter which party they belong to.
But it should certainly be someone you consider especially competent.
Especially competent to serve as President of the United States of America.
By voting your conscience, you and other brave Republican electors can give the House of Representatives the option to select a qualified candidate for the presidency.
I stand with you.
I stand with you.
I stand with you.
I stand with you in support and solidarity with conservatives, independents, and liberals.
And all citizens of the United States.
The American people trust that your voice speaks for us all.
And that you will make yourself heard through the constitutional responsibility granted to you by Alexander Hamilton himself.
What is evident is that Donald Trump lacks more than the qualifications to be president.
He lacks the necessary stability.
And clearly the respect for the Constitution of our great nation.
You have the position,
the authority,
and the opportunity to go down in the books as an American hero
who changed the course of history.
And you have my respect.
You have my respect.
You have my respect.
For your patriotism.
And service to the American people. Unite for America.
Okay, welcome back, folks, to the Robust Opposition, where every Sunday at 10 a.m. we bring you the voices of resistance organizing to fight corporate oligarchy in Washington, our state capitals, and in the streets. With me is my regular co-host, Lily Starling, and also our guest co-host, Steve Horn. And we are talking about, we want to end the show just talking a little bit about the electors who are meeting tomorrow, because we're going to have a celebrity clip of the celebrities that are urging the electors to not vote for Donald Trump. We've got different organizations organizing actions at state capitals around the country, asking these electors to not vote for Donald Trump. We've got Hillary Clinton and some of the electors asking for an intelligence briefing using the fact, quote unquote, that the Russians hacked our elections to as justification for delaying the Electoral College vote. So I'm opening it up to you guys. What do you think of all this?
I want to know who, just the general opponents of this, everyone's saying that the electors need to be faithless electors and vote against Trump, even if he won their state. I'm wondering who they think these electors are going to vote for instead. There seems to be a kind of consensus among my liberal friends that somehow they're going to vote for Hillary Clinton. And I don't believe that's the case at all. There's not just two choices. If you're not going to vote, if you're not going to cast your vote for the person that you were basically supposed to vote for, you could cast your vote for Donald Duck. So is it going to be Cruz? Is it going to be Mitt Romney? I don't think these Republican electors are going to be casting their vote for Hillary Clinton, even though she is a great Republican.
Yeah, they'll probably be voting for one of the people who is a finalist, one of the final four, whether it's Kasich, whether that's Cruz, whether that's Rubio, Trump. So,
in which case, don't we just end up with the deny 270, and then the decision goes to the Congress if no one gets enough?
Correct. Yeah. Yep.
And who do you think Congress is going to choose if that's the case?
They probably pick. So the question is, does the whole ticket go by the wayside? Because I've heard some people say, well, if you realize if you're a Trump, then what do you get? You get Pence. But I also heard some people say that the ticket is gone and then it gets replaced by a different ticket, so different combo.
Well, it's really unclear what's going to happen because, this has never been done before. And Lawrence Lessig, who you may know, overturning Citizens United and getting big money out of politics is one of his major issues. He actually ran for president briefly in 2016, and he ran as a single issue candidate. And a lot of us Bernie Sanders supporters were very upset with him because instead of endorsing Bernie, who is all about getting big money out of politics, and in fact, in this election, got big money out of politics, he was siphoning off some of that vote. And then when he finally dropped out, he didn't endorse Bernie, he didn't campaign for him, and now he is flailing around, being on any talk show that will have him, saying that he has spoken with 20, and now I hear the number is 30 Republican electors who have assured him that they are not going to vote for Donald Trump. Meanwhile, the mainstream media outlets who have tried to confirm this have found only that one faithless elector, the Republican faithless elector, saying that he's not going to vote for Donald Trump. And NPR did a great story the other day showing how these people, you might think that they're voting their conscience, and you might think that they're loyal to the will of the people, or they're loyal to what's good for the country. But in fact, most of them are Democratic Party operatives who, or party operatives, Republican as well, who rely upon the party for their positions in the party and are probably not going to buck who the party wanted elected. So there's that.
And then there's the other question of where did this particular strategic route come from? Was this a democratically made decision? Was this something that the grassroots have said, oh, we really want this? Or is this something that's an idea that's coming from rich donors? There's stories saying that George Soros and things that he fund, entities he funds or is associated with, were the money behind this idea. And so then it gets to a question of, is this even a good strategy? Does this, again, this is the question I keep asking, are you doing things that further embolden Trump and Trumpism if it doesn't go the way you want? And there's a serious question on the table of, are you, first of all, are you alienating a lot of people who are the grassroots who might not have thought this was a good idea? And then second of all, if this doesn't work, and there's a lot of indications that it won't, what happens in terms of empowering Trump going forward and his base?
Hello? Okay.
Yeah, so we wanted to just discuss 5 more minutes on the electors who are meeting tomorrow. Maybe if you want, I don't know if you've been listening to our discussion, but if you wanted to weigh in, we were talking about this movement to get the electors to overturn the will of the people, and what the motivation for that is, how they're trying to go about doing it, what would happen if they did do it. Would it go back to the Electoral College? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well,
I mean, not the Electoral College.
Number one, my initial impulse is that it's a bad idea. It seems like you would be going, well, despite who's going to become president, it's the existing system. And any attempt to go back, I think, is wishful thinking. Trump won under the existing rules. So unless there's some hard evidence to the contrary, I think it's a bad idea, and one prone to making us move towards civil unrest and perhaps civil violence.
Yes, I think that the idea is just going to be resistance from now on. We elected him. There are a lot of reasons for that. At some point, maybe after the first of the year, we'll come back and do a show. I know Eric Byler is going to be a guest of ours. He's been working with Jordan Chariton at TYT Politics. And during the election, he was going through the heartland of the country, interviewing Trump supporters. And he's agreed to come on and talk about what's in the mind of Trump supporters and people in the heartland of the country. So we're going to be probably continuing to analyze the meaning of this election well into the new year and how we can resist. And that's what our show is about. Our show is about the robust opposition. That's why we talk to people like Kevin Zeese, like Bob Fitrakis, people who have spent their lifetimes resisting whatever government, whether it's the corporate Democrats or the Republicans, because we all know there's one deep state. And we, the people, so far have been, at least for the last 30, 35 years, have been losing the war against the deep state. So 2017 is going to be a very interesting year. I want to thank my co-host Lily Starling and our guest host Steve Horn and our activist profile subject Bob Fitrakis for being on our show this week. And just let our viewers know that next week is Christmas, next Sunday is Christmas, and next Sunday after that is New Year's Day. So we're not going to be doing shows for the next 2 Sundays. If we decide to do a show on a weekday in between the holidays, we will let you know. So please subscribe to our channel, Our Revolution TV on YouTube. Like my Facebook page, Lauren Steiner, the Robust Opposition. And in both cases, you will be notified in your email of when our next show, in our email and in your Facebook inbox when our next show will be. So for now, I'd like to say thank you to our guests. And if you want to say final words before we sign off.
I just want to say thank you for letting me guest host. It was fun, and hope to be a guest sometime or help guest host again. So thanks for having me.
Lily?
Thank you, everyone, to all our guests that have been on today. This has been such a fascinating deep dive into journalism, fake news, election justice, and Bob in particular, thank you so much for your hard work on behalf of election justice.
Thanks, and I think it's just the beginning from what we found out from the recount, how truly broken, non-transparent, and undemocratic our system is.
Great.
There's battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody wrong. When people speak with their mind, getting so much resistance from behind. We got to stop children. What's that sound? Everybody looks going down.